They say humans are social creatures. That connection gives energy. That laughter with others fills the soul. That the more people you surround yourself with, the happier you become. And sometimes that is true. But for some people, something very different happens. A conversation ends, the room goes quiet, the messages stop, and instead of feeling fulfilled, something inside feels strangely empty. Not sad, not angry, just drained. As if every word spoken took a small piece of energy with it. Why does this happen? Why can an evening of friendly conversation feel like emotional labor? Why do some people leave social spaces feeling heavier instead of lighter? This experience is often misunderstood. People call it shyness, introversion, social awkwardness. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening in the mind and body. A quiet psychological process that many people carry silently. Tonight, this silent pattern will be explored. Let's begin. The room was full just a moment ago. Voices overlapping, laughter rising and falling like waves. Small conversations weaving through the air. From the outside, everything looked normal. You smiled when people spoke. You nodded at the right moments. You laughed when the group laughed. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual. And yet, something inside was quietly keeping track. A slow draining, almost invisible, like water leaking from a cracked glass. Because while the world saw participation, the mind was doing something far more complex. Listening carefully, reading facial expressions, adjusting tone, choosing words with precision. Tiny calculations happening every second. Was that joke too much? Did that response sound strange? Did the silence after that sentence mean anything? Most people never notice these inner questions. But for some, they never stop. The conversation flows outwardly, yet inside the mind, a second conversation runs in parallel. A quiet monitoring system, watching, interpreting, predicting, and slowly it consumes energy. This is why the exhaustion often arrives after the social moment ends. Not during. During the interaction, the mind remains alert, present, responsive. But when the environment finally becomes quiet, the nervous system releases the tension it was holding. And suddenly the fatigue appears, the kind of tiredness that sleep alone cannot fix. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. You sit alone afterward and feel something strange. Not regret, not sadness, just a deep need for silence. The kind of silence where no one is watching, no one is responding. No one expects anything, because social interaction, for some minds, is not simply communication. It is interpretation, a constant reading of emotional signals, tone shifts, facial expressions, body language, small details that others pass by without noticing. And every detail becomes information to process. Imagine standing in a crowded room while trying to hear every whisper. Trying to notice every subtle change in atmosphere, trying to sense how everyone feels. For some people, the mind naturally does exactly that. Without being asked, without permission, the brain becomes an emotional radar, sensitive, attentive, absorbing everything. And like any radar system, constant scanning requires power. So when the evening ends, when the conversation fades, something very predictable happens. The system powers down, and what remains is the quiet aftermath. A body that suddenly feels heavy, a mind that wants darkness, silence, stillness. Not because people were unpleasant, but because attention itself is expensive. And for certain minds, social environments demand a form of attention that the world rarely sees. This is why the phrase, "it was fun, but I'm exhausted," can feel confusing to others. How can something enjoyable also be draining? But the truth is simple. Enjoyment and exhaustion can exist together. Connection can be meaningful and still require recovery, because the human mind is not only shaped by what happens on the outside, but by how intensely it processes what happens within. Social interaction often looks effortless. Two people talking, a group sharing stories, voices rising and falling with ease. From the outside, it appears natural, almost automatic. But inside some minds, something much more complex is happening. Because every interaction contains an invisible layer, a quiet performance. Not the kind performed on a stage, but the kind shaped by awareness. Awareness of how words land. Awareness of how faces react. Awareness of how silence feels. While someone speaks, another part of the mind is observing. Did that sound confident? Did that response seem strange? Should the tone be lighter? Should the topic change? These questions rarely appear as loud thoughts. Instead, they move quickly beneath the surface. Small adjustments happening in real time. A sentence softened here, a laugh added there, a reaction carefully measured. The conversation continues smoothly, yet inside, something is constantly working. Psychologists sometimes describe this as impression management, the subtle effort of shaping how others experience you. It is something every human does to some degree, but for certain individuals, the sensitivity is heightened. The mind becomes a careful editor, reviewing each social moment as it unfolds. Even body language becomes part of the calculation. Should the posture look relaxed? Are the hands moving too much? Is eye contact too little or too intense? None of this is usually conscious in a rigid way. It happens quietly, like background software running on a computer. The system never fully pauses. And because it never pauses, it quietly consumes energy. A conversation that lasts 30 minutes might contain hundreds of tiny adjustments. Tone shifts, micro decisions, emotional readings, all happening while appearing calm and engaged. This is why someone can leave a perfectly pleasant gathering and feel unexpectedly depleted. Not because the people were difficult, but because maintaining social harmony required continuous attention. Imagine holding a delicate glass bowl while walking through a crowded room. Every step becomes careful, every movement intentional, not stressful, but constantly mindful. Eventually, the arms begin to ache. In the same way, emotional attentiveness can slowly tire the mind. The strange part is that others rarely see this effort. To them, the interaction looked relaxed, effortless, even enjoyable, and in many ways it truly was. But effort and enjoyment are not opposites. A musician may love playing music, yet still feel exhausted after the concert, because performing, even beautifully, requires energy. The same is true for emotional presence. When someone spends hours reading moods, responding thoughtfully, and maintaining social balance, the mind quietly works harder than it appears. And when the interaction finally ends, the performance ends with it. The smile softens, the mind stops scanning, the emotional editor finally rests. That is when the exhaustion arrives, not as failure, not as weakness, but simply as the natural cost of carrying awareness that others may never notice. The human brain is often compared to a supercomputer, but there is something important that comparison hides. Even the most powerful computer still runs on limited energy, and so does the brain. Every thought, every emotional reaction, every interpretation of another person's face requires metabolic resources. Tiny bursts of electrical and chemical activity traveling through billions of neurons. Most of the time, this energy usage goes unnoticed. But during social interaction, the brain becomes surprisingly busy. Because conversation is not only about words. When someone speaks, the brain is already doing several things at once. It is decoding language, predicting the next sentence, reading facial expressions, interpreting tone of voice, scanning body language, measuring emotional signals, and then, almost instantly, it prepares a response. All of this happens within seconds, often without conscious awareness. Neuroscientists sometimes describe social interaction as one of the most cognitively complex activities the brain performs, because it activates multiple systems at the same time. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and self-monitoring. The amygdala, constantly scanning for emotional meaning. The mirror neuron system, quietly simulating the feelings of others. The anterior cingulate cortex, monitoring social feedback and subtle signals of approval or tension. It is like an orchestra of brain regions playing together during every conversation. For some people, this system runs efficiently and quietly, but for others, the sensitivity is heightened. The brain pays closer attention to emotional information. Small details become meaningful. A pause in someone's voice, a slight change in expression, a shift in the room's atmosphere. Each signal is processed carefully, and processing requires energy. Researchers studying cognitive load often describe the mind as having a limited mental budget. Every task withdraws from that budget. Simple tasks cost little. Complex ones cost more. Social interaction, especially when emotional awareness is high, becomes an expensive activity. Not because people are difficult, but because the brain is doing more work behind the scenes. It is like driving through a quiet road versus navigating a dense city. On the quiet road, the mind relaxes. In the busy city, attention sharpens. Every movement matters. Every signal must be noticed. After a while, the driver begins to feel tired. Not because driving is unpleasant, but because constant attention drains energy. The same principle applies to social environments. Crowded conversations, multiple personalities, subtle emotional shifts. The brain quietly tracks it all. For highly perceptive individuals, the emotional traffic becomes dense. And after hours of navigating it, the mind begins to slow down. Words become harder to find. Attention starts to fade. A quiet desire for solitude appears. Not because connection is unwanted, but because the brain's energy reserves are quietly running low. The nervous system, like any living system, seeks balance. It knows when to engage, and it knows when to withdraw and recover. But before that recovery begins, another psychological layer often appears. One that many people carry silently during social moments. A subtle tension that hides beneath the smile. Most social interactions appear calm on the surface. People talk, they laugh, they share stories. Nothing seems tense. Yet beneath many conversations, something quiet often exists. A small layer of uncertainty, not loud enough to interrupt the moment, but present enough to shape it. Because human beings are deeply wired for belonging. For thousands of years, acceptance by the group meant survival. Rejection meant danger. The modern world may look different, but the brain still carries echoes of that ancient system. During social interaction, part of the mind constantly asks a quiet question. Am I safe here? Not physically safe, emotionally safe. Safe from embarrassment. Safe from misunderstanding. Safe from subtle disapproval. Most people experience this occasionally, but for some, the system is more sensitive. A slight pause after speaking might feel meaningful. A neutral facial expression might be interpreted as distance. A change in tone might trigger quiet doubt. Did that comment sound strange? Was that laugh genuine? Was that silence uncomfortable? These thoughts rarely appear dramatically. They are small, passing, but they accumulate, like grains of sand slowly filling a jar. Because every moment of self-monitoring requires attention. And attention requires energy. Imagine walking across a frozen lake while unsure how thick the ice is. Every step might be safe, yet each movement carries a subtle caution. Careful, measured, aware. Many people move through social conversations in a similar way. Not afraid, but attentive. Watching emotional signals closely, adjusting behavior to keep the atmosphere smooth. This attentiveness often comes from a good place, a desire to respect others, to avoid hurting someone, to maintain harmony. But even gentle vigilance can become tiring, because the mind never fully relaxes. Instead of simply existing within the conversation, part of the mind stands slightly outside of it, observing, analyzing, correcting. And while the smile remains natural, the system underneath is quietly working. Over time, the emotional muscles holding that awareness begin to fatigue, which is why the exhaustion often feels confusing. Nothing went wrong. No argument occurred. No rejection happened. And yet something still feels heavy afterward, because emotional safety systems were active the entire time, like security cameras that never turn off. Most of the time, these systems protect connection. But occasionally, they also create an invisible tension. A tension that many people carry quietly, without realizing it has a name. And beneath this tension lies another important truth about the human mind. Some people simply feel more atmosphere, more emotion, more subtle shifts in the room, which means that the world of social interaction does not just pass through them. It settles inside them, like rain absorbed slowly into deep soil. Some people walk into a room and notice only the conversation. Others notice the atmosphere, the quiet tension between two people standing apart, the hesitation in someone's voice, the forced smile that disappears a moment too quickly. These details are subtle, often invisible to most, yet for certain minds they appear clearly, not because those people are searching for them, but because their perception is naturally tuned to emotional signals. Psychologists sometimes describe this as high emotional sensitivity, a heightened awareness of feelings, moods, and subtle social cues. It is not a disorder. It is not a flaw. It is simply a different way the nervous system processes the world. Imagine walking into a forest. One person hears birds. Another hears the wind in the leaves, the distant rustling of animals, the slow movement of branches, the faint change in air. The environment is the same, but the level of perception is different. The same happens in social spaces. A casual conversation may contain layers of emotional information. Excitement, discomfort, politeness, fatigue. Most people filter these signals automatically, but highly sensitive minds often receive more of them, like an antenna that picks up frequencies others never notice. And every signal requires interpretation. Was that laugh genuine or polite? Was that comment playful or sharp? Is the room relaxed or slightly tense? None of these questions are asked deliberately. The brain simply processes them continuously, because empathy, the ability to feel what others might be feeling, is deeply active. When someone nearby feels nervous, the body may register that tension. When someone carries sadness, it can be sensed even in quiet moments. This deep perception can create beautiful connection. Sensitive individuals often understand emotions that others struggle to name. They notice when someone is hurting. They sense when silence means something more than silence. But sensitivity also has a cost, because absorbing emotional information is not the same as simply observing it. It enters the nervous system, settles inside, like rain slowly soaking into soil. Over time, that emotional absorption becomes heavy, especially in environments filled with many people, many moods, many energies. The brain must process them all. Imagine standing beneath a waterfall of sound, emotion, and expression. The experience may be meaningful, even enjoyable, but eventually the body needs to step away from the water, not to escape people, but to regain balance. This is why solitude often feels restorative to sensitive minds. Silence removes the constant flow of emotional signals. The nervous system quiets, the mental antenna lowers, and slowly the internal world becomes still again. But before that stillness is fully understood, many people experience a moment of confusion, a moment when they begin to question themselves. Why does connection sometimes feel so heavy? Why does the mind ask for distance after moments of closeness? For many, the answer begins with a quiet realization, a realization that changes how this experience is seen. For a long time, the experience often feels confusing. Other people seem energized by social gatherings. They stay longer, talk louder, move easily from one conversation to another, and afterward, they appear refreshed. But inside, something very different may be happening. After the same gathering, the mind feels foggy. The body feels heavy. A quiet urge for silence appears almost immediately. And for many people, the first explanation that comes to mind is a harsh one. Something must be wrong. Maybe the personality is too quiet. Maybe the mind is too sensitive. Maybe social ability is simply lacking. These assumptions are common, because society often praises constant sociability, the ability to be everywhere, to talk endlessly, to remain energized by crowds. Silence, on the other hand, is sometimes misunderstood, can be mistaken for withdrawal, for awkwardness, for distance. So the mind begins to question itself. Why can others stay for hours while exhaustion appears so quickly? Why does the body ask for solitude after something that looked enjoyable? But slowly, a different understanding begins to form, often through reflection, or through learning about the way human minds differ. Because not all nervous systems operate with the same rhythm. Some are naturally stimulated by external activity. Others process stimulation more deeply. For those who process deeply, experiences do not simply pass through. They linger. Every conversation, every tone shift, every emotional signal, all of it is absorbed, interpreted, and stored, which means that social interaction becomes a richer experience, but also a heavier one. The realization begins quietly, perhaps after reading about sensitivity, perhaps after noticing the same pattern repeating over the years. Connection feels meaningful, yet recovery is always necessary. And when this pattern becomes clear, something important happens. The exhaustion stops feeling like failure. It starts looking like information, a signal from the nervous system, not saying avoid people, but simply saying, balance is needed. Just as the body becomes tired after physical effort, the mind becomes tired after deep emotional engagement. Neither one is weakness. Both are natural responses to energy being used. This realization often brings relief. The relief of understanding that the experience has a shape, a logic, a quiet psychology behind it. Instead of asking, why am I like this? The question begins to change. It becomes gentler, more curious. How does this mind restore itself? What does it need after moments of connection? And slowly, the answer reveals something that society rarely celebrates enough. The quiet power of solitude. When the noise fades, something important begins to happen. Not immediately. At first, the silence feels almost unfamiliar. After hours of voices, movement, and emotional signals, the nervous system is still adjusting. Like a lake whose surface continues to ripple long after the wind stops. But slowly, the water becomes still. The mind begins to settle. Thoughts slow down. Breathing deepens. The emotional atmosphere that once filled the room gradually dissolves. This is the quiet function of solitude. Not isolation, not escape, but restoration. Because the brain, like any living system, needs moments where it is not required to respond. Moments where no one is interpreting tone. No one is reading expressions. No one is adjusting behavior. Just presence. Just stillness. In solitude, the emotional radar finally powers down. The constant scanning that once tracked every shift in conversation gently fades. The nervous system returns to its natural rhythm. Imagine walking through a crowded city for hours. Cars passing. Voices everywhere. Lights flashing. Even if the city is exciting, the senses eventually grow tired. Now imagine stepping into a quiet forest. The air feels different. The body relaxes without effort. The mind softens. Solitude creates a similar shift. It removes the dense flow of external signals and allows the inner world to breathe again. For sensitive and deeply perceptive individuals, this space is essential. Because during social interaction, the mind absorbs so much information. Not only words, but emotions, atmospheres, subtle human energies. Solitude becomes the place where these experiences are quietly processed, where feelings settle like sediment sinking to the bottom of a river, where clarity slowly returns. Yet society often misunderstands this need. Silence is sometimes labeled as loneliness. Time alone is sometimes seen as avoidance. But for many people, solitude is not about leaving others behind. It is about returning to oneself. The quiet reconnection with thoughts that were paused during the noise of interaction. The gentle recharging of emotional energy. Just as sleep restores the body, solitude restores attention. It rebuilds the internal space needed to listen, understand, and connect again. Without it, the mind becomes crowded, overstimulated, heavy with unprocessed emotion. But with it, something subtle happens. The exhaustion fades. Not instantly, but gradually, like the slow return of sunlight after a long storm. And once that balance returns, something interesting becomes clear. The need for solitude never meant that connection was unwanted. It simply meant that the human heart was designed for rhythm, moments of togetherness, and moments of quiet, both equally human, both equally necessary. For a long time, society has told a simple story about connection. The more social someone is, the healthier they must be. The louder the laughter, the larger the circle, the more constant the interaction. But human psychology is rarely that simple. Because the human heart was never designed for only one environment. Not endless crowds, and not endless solitude. Instead, it was shaped by rhythm. Ancient human life moved in cycles. Moments of gathering around fire. Moments of walking alone through open land. Moments of shared storytelling. Moments of quiet observation beneath the night sky. Connection and solitude existed together, neither one competing with the other. Yet modern life often forgets this balance. Social spaces are constant. Messages arrive all day. Voices fill every moment. Silence becomes rare. And when someone quietly steps away from the noise, the action can look unusual. People may ask questions. Why leave early? Why disappear for a while? Why not stay longer? But beneath those questions lies a misunderstanding. Because stepping away is not rejection. It is regulation, the nervous system seeking equilibrium. Just as lungs inhale and exhale, emotional life moves between presence with others and presence with oneself. Too much of either side begins to feel unnatural. Without connection, the heart grows lonely. Without solitude, the mind grows crowded. Those who feel drained after socializing are often simply feeling the edge of that balance sooner than others. Their emotional systems absorb more, process more, sense more, which means the moment of restoration must arrive sooner. Not as avoidance, but as maintenance, like a garden that needs quiet rain after a day of bright sun. And when this truth becomes clear, something gentle happens inside. The experience stops feeling like contradiction. Enjoying people while still needing space no longer feels strange. The two desires begin to coexist peacefully. Because the need for quiet never meant the absence of love for connection. It only meant that the inner world needed time to breathe. And once it does, the ability to connect returns again. Calmly, naturally, without force. Just as a river eventually returns to the sea after wandering through quiet valleys. Human energy moves in similar cycles. Moments of closeness, moments of stillness. Both part of the same emotional landscape. Both deeply human. If this reflection felt familiar, if parts of this quiet experience seemed to mirror something inside your own life, then you are not alone in that feeling. Many people move through the world carrying this same quiet pattern, enjoying connection, appreciating conversation, yet still needing moments where the mind can return to silence and breathe again. There is nothing unusual about a nervous system that feels deeply, nothing strange about a mind that processes the emotional atmosphere around it. Sometimes it simply means that awareness runs a little deeper. And that depth often requires rest. If this video made you feel seen in some small way, this space will always remain open for reflections like this. A quiet place where the hidden corners of the human mind and heart are explored gently, without judgment. If you would like to stay connected to these kinds of conversations, subscribing is simply an invitation to return whenever another reflection appears. And if you feel comfortable sharing your thoughts below, your experience might quietly help someone else understand their own. But there is never pressure. Listening is enough. Being here is enough. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.